On Christmas Eve, 1945, a family of 11 went to sleep in their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. By morning, 5 of their children were gone. Not taken, not found dead, not accounted for in any way, just gone. The house burned. The fire department came. The flames were extinguished. And when the family searched the rubble for the remains of their 5 missing children, they found nothing. No bones, no ash, no evidence that those 5 children were ever in that house when it burned. For the rest of their lives, George and Jennie Sodder refused to believe their children died in that fire. And the more you look at the evidence, the harder it is to disagree with them. This is the story of the Sodder children. And nearly 80 years later, it remains one of the most disturbing and unexplained mysteries in American history. George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who came to America in 1908. He settled in Fayetteville, West Virginia, built a successful trucking business, and raised a family with his wife, Jennie. By 1945, they had 10 children together. The family was well known in the community, well liked, and by all accounts, living a good and ordinary life. Their home was a large house on Route 16. It was where all 10 children had grown up. It was familiar, warm, and full of life. On the night of December 24th, 1945, the family celebrated Christmas Eve together. The children were excited. Gifts were wrapped. The house was decorated. George and Jennie eventually went to bed, leaving 5 of their older children awake downstairs. Morris was 14. Martha was 12. Louis was 9. Jennie, named after her mother, was 8. And little Sylvia was 5 years old. At around midnight, Jennie Sodder was woken up by the telephone. A woman on the other end asked for someone who didn't live there. Jennie told her she had the wrong number and went back to sleep, thinking nothing of it. At around 1 a.m., she woke again, this time to smoke. The house was on fire. George and Jennie managed to escape the burning home, along with 4 of their children. They got out fast, moving through smoke and heat and chaos. But Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie Jr., and Sylvia were not with them. George tried to go back in. He attempted to re-enter the burning home multiple times to reach his children. He was beaten back by the flames every time. He ran to his truck to try to pull it up to the house, maybe to climb onto the roof and reach the upper windows. The truck would not start. This was strange. He had used the truck just hours earlier. It was in perfect working condition. He ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. The call was made at approximately 1 a.m. The fire department did not arrive until 8 a.m., 7 hours later. For a fire station that was less than 3 miles away. When the fire was finally extinguished and the family searched the rubble, they found no human remains, no bones, no teeth, nothing that could confirm that 5 children had perished in that house. The official ruling came quickly. The children died in the fire. Case closed. But for George and Jennie Sodder, the case was never closed. Not for a single day of their lives. Let's talk about the evidence, because the official explanation falls apart the moment you start asking questions. First, the bodies. A fire hot enough to completely incinerate 5 human bodies would need to reach temperatures of around 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit and sustain those temperatures for several hours. House fires, even severe ones, rarely reach those temperatures consistently throughout a structure. Forensic experts have pointed out that even in cremation furnaces designed specifically to incinerate human remains, bone fragments always survive. Always. But in the Sodder house, nothing was found. Not a single bone fragment from any of the 5 children. The state fire marshal ruled the cause of the fire as faulty wiring. But investigators noted that the family's Christmas decorations, which were still present in parts of the rubble, were largely undamaged. If the fire had been hot enough to completely destroy 5 human bodies, it is extraordinarily difficult to explain how paper decorations survived. Second, the ladder. George had kept a ladder on the side of the house specifically for emergencies. On the night of the fire, the ladder was gone. It was later found, thrown into a bush some distance from the house. Someone had moved it. Someone had made sure it wasn't where it was supposed to be that night. Third, the trucks. George had 2 trucks. Neither would start that night. Both had been working perfectly just hours before the fire. When a mechanic examined them days later, he found that someone had tampered with them. A critical part had been removed from the engine of at least one vehicle, a part that would have to be deliberately disconnected, not something that would fail on its own. Fourth, the phone call. That strange late-night call Jennie received before the fire started. A woman asking for someone who didn't live there, in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve. Many investigators and researchers believe this call was deliberate, designed to confirm that people were home, or possibly to check that George and Jennie were asleep before whoever started the fire made their move. Fifth, the fire department. A 7-hour response time for a fire station less than 3 miles away. The fire chief at the time gave inconsistent explanations for the delay. He later made an official determination that the children's remains had been found in the basement, claiming he personally recovered them. But he produced no evidence, no documentation, no chain of custody, just a statement. And the family, who had searched every inch of that rubble themselves, found nothing. When the state requested a proper forensic examination, the fire chief reportedly showed investigators a few vertebrae he claimed came from the house. A Smithsonian forensic expert examined them and concluded they came from an adult, not a child, and that they were likely animal bones. George and Jennie Sodder did not accept the official verdict. They couldn't. Nothing added up. They hired private investigators. They put up billboards along Route 16 with photographs of their 5 missing children. They offered reward money. They kept the search going for decades. In 1949, they had a monument built in their front yard. A large billboard with photos of the 5 children and a message that read, "Unsolved. 5 of our children are missing from the fire of December 25th, 1945. That billboard stood in their yard for the rest of their lives. George Sodder believed he knew why his children were taken. In the years before the fire, he had been vocal in his criticism of Benito Mussolini and Italian fascism. He had gotten into an argument with a man who had come to his door selling insurance, a man George had refused to buy from and had argued with about Mussolini. According to George, the man had made a threat. He said something along the lines of, "Your house will be set on fire and your children will be destroyed." George reported this to local officials. Nothing was done. He also recalled that another man had come to his property months before the fire, apparently looking around the house in a way that made the family uncomfortable. When George confronted him, the man said he was looking at the construction. He left without another word. George believed these men were connected to organized crime, possibly with ties back to Italy, and that the fire and the disappearance of his children was an act of retaliation for his public criticism of Mussolini and fascism. It sounds like something from a different era. But when you consider the evidence of tampering, the missing ladder, the disabled trucks, the missing remains, it becomes very difficult to dismiss. In 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, Jennie Sodder received a letter in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. The photograph showed a young man, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. On the back of the photograph, someone had written a single line. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Illil boys, a 90132. The young man in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to what Louis Sodder might have looked like as an adult. The handwriting was never identified. The address or code on the back was never decoded. The photograph was never traced to a source. Jennie Sodder held on to that photograph until the day she died. The family hired a private investigator to travel to the postmark origin of the letter. He was never heard from again. Let that sink in for a moment. A private investigator hired to look into this case disappeared. He was never found. George Sodder died in 1968, still searching for answers. Jennie Sodder died in 1989. Their surviving children continued the search for years afterward. The case has never been officially reopened in any meaningful way. So what happened to Morris, Martha, Louis, Jennie Jr., and Sylvia Sodder? The official position remains that they died in the fire. But consider everything we've walked through. The complete absence of human remains in a fire that forensic science tells us should have left bones behind. The tampered vehicles, the missing ladder, the unexplained 7-hour delay by the fire department, the fabricated or misidentified bone evidence presented by the fire chief, the threatening conversation George had before the fire, the mysterious photograph that arrived 22 years later showing a man who looked exactly like a grown version of one of the missing children, the private investigator who vanished while looking into it. Some researchers believe the children were taken before the fire was set, that the fire was a cover, designed to make their disappearance permanent and unquestioned, that the children may have been taken across state lines, possibly even out of the country, and raised under different identities. Others believe the answer is darker, that the children did not survive whatever happened that night, but that their deaths were not caused by the fire. The truth is, we don't know. And that is perhaps the most disturbing thing about this case. Nearly 80 years of questions and not a single definitive answer. 5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve. By morning, they were gone, and no one has ever been held accountable for what happened to them. The Sodder Family Monument stood in their yard for decades. After Jennie passed away in 1989, the family eventually took it down. But the case never left the public consciousness. It has been featured in documentaries, investigated by journalists and amateur researchers, and discussed by forensic experts who continue to agree that the official explanation is deeply inadequate. If you look at a photograph of George and Jennie Sodder taken in the years after the fire, you can see it in their faces. The particular grief of not knowing, the particular torture of a question that has no answer. They spent the rest of their lives wondering if their children were still out there somewhere, alive, not knowing who they really were or where they came from. I think about that photograph that arrived in 1967. The young man who looked like Louis. The words on the back. I love brother Frankie. Someone wrote that. Someone sent it. Someone knew something. And they never came forward. If you have any information about the Sodder children case, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children still maintains records on cold cases. The case is still technically open. 5 children deserve answers. Their family deserved answers. And until we have them, the Sodder case remains exactly what that billboard on Route 16 said for so many years. Unsolved. If this case kept you up, you are not alone. Drop your theories in the comments below. Do you think the children survived? Do you think they were taken? And who do you think sent that photograph in 1967? Subscribe to the Unsolved Vault for a new case every Tuesday and Friday. Next time, we're going into one of the most baffling disappearances in American history. A college student, a crashed car on a snowy road, and a case that has haunted investigators for over 20 years. You don't want to miss it.